Good afternoon, seniors. In today's Pride Time, I'm going to give a little history on this. A couple years back, we talked to a couple of the outgoing seniors, and they told us rather than doing more of the career stuff, the type of interest inventories and things like that have been done in Pride Time, they'd rather us lean more towards life skills, some financial topics, some things that might be useful to them going forward. So, with that in mind, today's topic is renting versus buying a home. Something you're not doing right now, probably. It's certainly viable, maybe advisable to keep living off the bank of mom and dad for a while if you can. But certainly within the next 5, 6 years, one or both of those topics will come up as being an option that you'll be looking at, delving into the details on. So we've got three of our relatively young teachers who were in your boat not too long ago, and they're going to talk a little bit about their living situations, and we'll talk a little bit about renting versus buying and the advantages of each. So without further ado, here they are.
Well, hi everybody. I'm Miss Cundy, if you don't know who I am. I teach agriculture and I rent currently, but am looking and I'm in the process of buying a house. From high school now, I started first, of course, doing the campus thing and living on campus. And then I leased in college. During my internships, because every summer in college I had an internship, I subleased, which meant I leased from somebody else who had the lease, because I was only in an area temporarily, and that was what made sense. After college and moving to Brillion, I have since rented an apartment, and that was great because as I started out my career here, wasn't sure where I would be going. Now I really like you guys, so I'll stay around a while. I'm looking for houses. I'll let these guys share their story.
Could you explain,
Yeah.
Ms. Cundy, what lease means? Just the word lease, because some of them might not know.
Yeah, leasing is like renting, or it's another word for renting. So if somebody owns the house, you sign a lease, you sign an agreement, a contract that says whatever the manager of that apartment or that complex it says, like you can't have pets, you can't have so many people stay in your house for so many days without approval. So there's a couple rules that go along with that, and that you will agree to their rules, and that you agree to pay so much, you agree to pay utilities, you agree to these outline rules for their complex.
And I would guess that, and maybe you said that already, leases a certain amount of time, like 12-month lease would be pretty normal. So being a college person, subleasing happens quite a bit because if you go home for the summer, you can make a little bit of money because you paid for the 12 months anyway. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I found, because I also subleased my apartment, when I also was a subleaser, that was the best way to basically zero out. I paid and somebody paid me for my space in my apartment, and I paid for somebody else's space. So subleasing is a really great way that if you, like I had mentioned, interned at different sites to look around. Even when I did my student teaching, in Wisconsin Rapids, I subleased a room from a family. So there's a lot of different ways that you can sublease to equal out what you have to pay for your leasing.
Hi, I'm Mr. Daly. I teach English here at the high school. Similar to Miss Cundy, when I was starting school at UW-Whitewater, I stayed in the dorms. There's a lot of positives to be said about living in dorms, but for me, 1 year was enough. So the year after that, a couple of people I met and we rented a house that was also in Whitewater. We ended up living there actually for the next 3 years that we went to school there. It's a decent option to look into because, like I already said, the dorms don't necessarily, they're not for everybody long term. That's not to say there aren't some positives, but also if you are not on a meal plan and you're not paying room and board, a lot of times by renting you can save money. So that was kind of the main reason why I made that choice. So for 3 years in Whitewater, then we all lived in the same house. And one of the positives there was a lot of the things that living in a house you think you might have to do were taken care of, stuff like lawn care and snow removal the landlords took care of for us. That depends on what type of lease you sign, so if that's something that is really important to you, it's important to actually read what you're signing, especially if it is a lease. After that, I actually did my student teaching in Superior, Wisconsin. I had an internship up there, and my now wife then girlfriend. I actually stayed with her parents while I was up there, and so that was rent free, but obviously there was the potential to step on toes. So I was happy that that didn't happen, and now we're married. After that, I rented a house in Wittenberg, Wisconsin. It's like right in the middle of the state. I knew kind of when I got there that that was probably not going to be a place I wanted to stay long term. So that's why renting was the better option there. My wife and I ended up being there for 2 years. Then we moved to Appleton, where we currently live. When I got the job here in Brillion, we rented an apartment there for a couple years, and we actually last May closed on our house. Our monthly payments for a mortgage are more than our rent payments would be, and we still have to pay for things like utilities and stuff like that. But the main long-term advantage, I would say, of owning a house would be that you are actually investing for something, or sorry, investing in something that you will in the future own. So even if you are paying maybe 1.5 times for your mortgage what you would pay for rent, you will eventually own your house. It will be yours, and it's an investment for the future, and then at that point, you're basically living for free. Obviously, that's a ways down the line for most people when they buy a house, but that is something to really, once you are in a place where you want to stay, think about.
Well, I'm Mr. Banky, 8th grade ELA teacher. I'm here representing the middle school. Currently, I grew up in Brillion. I came back to Brillion, and since it's a place I feel like staying for the rest of my life, I invested in a house just over a year ago now. Before I could find the perfect house, just some things while you're looking at houses. Make sure you look at plenty of them, different price ranges, just like Mr. Daly said. It will be a little more costly than renting, but when you're looking at buying a house, you are making an investment, so you want to make a smart investment. Find a house that you're not overpaying for and something that has good resale value. Advantages to owning a house, it's your own property. It might come with a little bit more work, but what you have is yours. You could, if you're young and you have friends, you could rent out rooms from your house to kind of offset the cost of what owning a house would be. If you are someone that likes more work, it's nice because you can do your own things to it. Whereas when you're renting, you have to live in the place as it is. When it's your house, you can do your own things to it, make it your own place. So when you finally find that place where you're good with settling down, looking at a house and buying a house is just a really good investment for the future. When you're buying your first house, it doesn't have to be for your forever home. So maybe when you're thinking investment, look at houses that will have good resale value in neighborhoods that people are going to want to move into when you look to sell that first house you buy.
Okay, so now Mr. Daly and Mr. Banky kind of got into the details a little bit further into advantages, especially of home owning. Anything you want to add, Ms. Cundy, advantages to home owning before we get into some of the advantages maybe of why a person would prefer to rent, even if they had the choice either way?
I think just knowing like those are your roots, or that's where you're going to stay, or the area, and knowing the people around there. Not saying that in a renting situation that you can't know the people well enough. But when you really set your roots in a housing, that's what I'm finding as I'm looking for a house right now, is knowing the people that are around your area. And one of you guys said knowing the neighborhoods and knowing, I know you're not thinking about this now, but schools that are around you, what grocery stores that are around you, what is happening around you, parks, things like that. You want to know what the neighborhood is, and as you set your roots in buying a house, that's something that you want to look into. And then also knowing the quality of the house. Like these guys said too, you're investing in it, but also it's little things, your driveway, your roof, your garage doors, those types of things, and looking at the quality of the house. Whereas in a renting situation, you don't necessarily get to determine that quality.
What about renting? What are the upsides to renting? We've heard a lot about, I think, home owning and the plus sides, particularly because we have two who recently bought and one who's going to. What about the upsides to renting? Because there's a lot of people who rent even though they could own. if they had that choice. What are some upsides to renting?
I think one upside to renting is kind of the opposite of why it's nice to have a house is you take care of it and make it your own. As renting, you don't have to do anything to it. If you have a water pipe break, you call who you're leasing from, and your landlord will come and they have to pay for all the fixings. So you have this monthly rate that you pay, but you don't have to worry about if something wrecks on the house or any of those kinds of bills. So what you pay is, that's what you're always going to have to pay. Where with your mortgage, you might have to pay your mortgage, and then if you need to replace the roof on the house or something else goes wrong, you have that additional cost that you have to cover. Whereas when you're renting, you won't have those additional costs.
Along with that too, I love being outside, so I miss the landscaping part of it, living in an apartment, but I'm not a fan of winter. So I don't have to plow my own yard. That's honestly one of the plus sides, and it's really silly. But that yard care, if you're not ready for it and you don't want it, granted you can find houses that don't have much, but you still have a little bit. So some of that exterior, interior stuff, like Tanner had said, Mr. Banky had said, like you don't have to really worry about necessarily.
I guess I would say that renting would be a nice stepping stone into owning a house personally. If I were to go back to what I was like when I was in high school, even when I was close to graduating, I think going from living with my parents to owning a property would probably have been too big of a step for me personally. So you do still get some of the things renting, some of the responsibility pieces that you would get with owning, but it's more of a gradual release than it would be to just go from living with your parents and being a dependent to having your own place that you pay for.
Yeah, I'm gonna step in and give a few thoughts as well, if that's okay. Get into the camera, I guess. I'm behind it just a voice before, but I've of course done both. I've sold a couple houses, bought a couple houses, rented some, and I go back to my father-in-law. If you ever saw the old show Tim the Toolman Taylor, there was a guy in there named Wilson Wilson who was this master of all things. He just seemed to know a lot about everything. The Toolman's next door neighbor. My father-in-law was like that. He always had the knowledge and the wisdom. And he said to us, well, you want to buy as soon as you can because renting you have nothing to show for it. And I want to go both ways on that. Yes, when you rent, there's nothing tangible you show for it. But there's also, just to know that there's also some expenses with owning that don't give you something tangible, but you're still paying for them. For two of the biggies for me, one Mr. Banky mentioned already, and that's upkeep. They estimate that upkeep in a home is approximately 1% of your home's value. So if you have a $100,000 house, expect to average $1,000 a year on some sort of repair, maintenance, something like that. And if that sounds like a lot, some years it is, but you put on a roof and it's going to be $8,000, $9,000 right off the bat. So that takes a lot of percent right there, and you've got appliances that are going to go and things like that. So you've got maintenance at about 1%. You also have property taxes that come through. So if your property taxes are, just to use a number that multiplies, $3,600 a year, that's going to be $300 a month. You don't have a tangible, you can't hold a property tax, you're just paying it. The same thing is with interest on your loan. If you take out a $100,000 loan, for round numbers, if you have 5% interest, you're paying $5,000. You're paying $5,000 a year. That's not giving you something tangible that you can hold, feel, and touch. So there are some expenses there. That's what I learned. So either way, you're getting some expenses you don't have something tangible for. These guys said, in temporary situations, renting, of course, makes by far the most sense.
You pay rent and utilities and all the other things included for that month. And the same goes for houses. Just because you can put a down payment on a house, which I believe the minimum you're allowed to put down is 3%. Just because you can pay for 3% of a house doesn't mean in the future you can pay for the other 97%.
Just to go off of that, if you're looking at buying a house, don't jump into it too soon. Do all your research. Banks like giving money because you have to pay interest on it. They will approve you for more money that you might want to be paying. So just make sure you really check out monthly payments and stuff. Just because a bank's going to give you money doesn't mean you're gonna be able to easily afford it. So find a price point that fits you in your situation if you're going into the housing market. Otherwise, renting and housing, they're both really nice options depending on your situation. No matter what you're planning to do, just make sure